Well, welcome everybody to our filmmakers panel, Screenplays and Documentary Writing, where the road forks. Nice copy. Who wrote that? Oh, I did. Anyway, I want to introduce our panelists first, and then we'll talk about the differences between screenplay writing and writing for documentaries, and where there are differences and where there aren't differences, and the different styles people use as well. Okay, let's start at the far end. It's Alfred Cataldo, who is primarily a screenplay writer for narrative film. Wow, there's a lot up there. I can tell you a little bit more about Alfred too. He's a screenwriter, he's also a director, he's a producer, and a trial attorney.
Trying to find something I'm good at.
I don't know, I think that could be more useful in documentary form. He was a winner and or finalist in 23 major screenwriting competitions, 4 different feature scripts, including the Nantucket Film Festival Tony Cox Screenwriting Competition, right?
Yep.
Okay. That was sponsored by Showtime, and I found fascinating the fact that you wrote 2 of the 3 finalist scripts in a blind competition. That says a lot. He wrote, produced, and directed the Norman Rockwell Code. I don't know if anybody's seen that online. It's a 35-minute web-based spoof of the Da Vinci Code that was featured, which had more than 1 million online hits in a 3-month period. Catalfo's film Bighorn is a 15-minute supernatural historical fantasy and winner of the 2011 online New England Film Festival. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and some of the stories relating to Custer are fascinating. Hopefully we'll get some time to get there. His latest film is Rocket Ship, which is the one that's currently being shown here at the Cleveland International Film Festival. It's part of the Shorts Program number 2, which is shown at 2:40 today. And I looked at the batting order, and I think your film is like 5th out of the 6 that are being shown. So if you hustle and you get onto the transit and head right down there, you just might make it, okay? Also, Rocket Ship, I should give you a little bit of a background on that. It's about a unlikely bond formed between a lonely boy and an elderly man that claims to be a former astronaut. And it's sort of his honor to the former astronaut?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I understand too that you've had a feature script, Betrayed, which was recently chosen as a grand prize winner of the Rhode Island International Film Festival Screenplay Competition. Tim Cawley is our next guest, and Tim has produced and directed 3 films, 2 narrative shorts and a feature-length documentary, which have played festivals such as Locarno, Vancouver, Montreal World, Rain Dance, Fantastic Fest, and the Cleveland International Film Festival, obviously.
I had to put that on the list, play to the crowd, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Get him on your side. His latest effort is From Nothing Something, which is a documentary on the creative process, which is being shown at the festival, and I believe the last showing of it is tonight at 6:50.
And tomorrow afternoon at 2 something.
Oh, I didn't have that one. Okay. And Tim, in his day job, can we say that?
Sure.
Is a advertising creative director from Boston who's worked on such brands as Miller Lite, Dunkin' Donuts, Major League Baseball, and XM Satellite Radio. Tim's a ASCAP card-carrying songwriter whose music has been played on MTV, VH1, and E. Right?
That is
I miss
true.
anything?
That is true.
Okay. Amy Finkel is our next panelist, and she's a designer, documentary filmmaker, and photographer. She's the founder and creative director of Sailor Beware. I like the name of that. An agency that specializes in web design and video work. She's an instructor at both NYU and Parsons School of Design, where she teaches classes in web design, photography, and documentary filmmaking. Amy served as a judge for the feature-length documentary division for IDA's 2009 Documentary Achievement Awards. She's also been a judge for New York festivals in their TV documentary division. And Amy also acts as, you ready for this? Doctor for New York Foundation for the Arts Doctor's Hours for Filmmakers. Amy holds an MFA in Design and Technology from Parsons, as well as a BA in Theater from Connecticut College. In 2004, it says you made a documentary about four-string jazz banjo culture entitled Zing Went the Strings of My Heart, which was screened at numerous film festivals and nominated for the Para Lawrence Award by the International Documentary Association. I understand you're from Seattle, but you now reside in Brooklyn.
I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Yes.
and for those of you in the audience, that's the one in New York, not down the highway. Okay. Also with us is Erica Ginsberg. And Erica is following up on an 18-year career with the U.S. Department of State in the area of international, professional, academic, and cultural exchange programs. She's the co-founder of the organization Docs in Progress. And in 2004, is that the founding date of the organization?
Yes,
Okay.
more or less.
Yeah, and you've been the executive director since 2009. Okay. She's coordinated professional development programs for the Maryland Association of Nonprofits, and from 2007 to 2010, Erica was volunteer program chair for the Utopia Film Festival, which is a community film festival in Greenbelt, Maryland. And it says here you're also host of the D Word, an online documentary filmmaker community. Erica's written articles for Docs and The Independent, and is the newsletter editor, principal writer, and blogger for Docs in Progress. Her video work includes Crucible of War, Talking Threads, and the production of several videos spotlighting the power of international exchange programs. While Docs in Progress and her other work take up most of her time, she's also at work on her own doc in progress called America's Park.
Current title, yes.
Okay. This is no great secret. I can tell them you're a judge, can't I?
Yes.
Yeah. She's on the documentary jury for the Cleveland International Film Festival. Okay. And finally, Ben Popick, our last panelist, is a comedy writer and director. And Ben, I understand you've got a passion for documentary-style comedy. We'll have to get into that. And his new feature is called The Exquisite Corpse Project, and that's showing tonight at 9:30 at the festival, and tomorrow at 7 p.m. And it says here that it's half narrative comedy and half documentary. That's going to take some explanation. Okay. Let's see. You put some constraints on these people that they could only read.
Yeah,
How much of
basically, I challenged 5 comedy writers to each write 15 pages of a feature script, but each person was only allowed to read the previous 5 pages before writing their section.
That is an interesting approach. Okay. So, did I miss anybody's film times? Yours.
It's called Forever. It's playing today at 3:40 and tomorrow at 11:45.
11:45 in the morning. Yeah,
Yes.
I got that down here. It's a fascinating topic too. The name of it is Forever. If you just want to give them a couple of words as to what the film's about.
It's about pet loss and about sort of the sociological evolution of pets, family structure, various ways we memorialize them. So.
Okay, and Al, if you could tell us maybe just a little bit more about the short that's going to be at the festival today.
My short is called Rocket Ship. It's my 5th short, and it's 15 minutes. And I have a friend who's an artist, and if you can believe it, he makes rocket ship sculptures out of old vacuum cleaners and out of Victorian balustrades. And every time I was up in his workshop, I would go, yeah, you know, there's a short film here. I don't know what the heck it would be, but And so I came up with this concept. I write narrative fiction, and I came up with this concept of this kind of lonely kid who hangs out with this guy. This guy claims to be a former astronaut, and when he, the parents are really down on that whole thing and don't believe him. And when the astronaut or the elderly guy dies, the kid goes and steals his ashes because the astronaut never got to go into space because of a heart condition, or at least that's what he says. So he decides to steal the guy's ashes and put them into a rocket ship, and they had some discussion about what it would take for propulsion and that sort of thing. So he steals the guy's ashes, he steals a bunch of fireworks, and his plan is to shoot him off, as a tribute to him.
I think, Tim, you're the only one who hasn't had a chance to put in a few words about your film.
My film it was sort of like a fantasy camp for my creative mind. I went and met 15 different creative people from every creative walk of life, from chefs to fashion designers to sculptors to scientists, and said, how do you think up an idea? How do you protect it? How do you get it into the world? How do you not lose faith in your idea? And kind of distills the universal truths of, is a comedian writing a joke go through the same things a scientist trying to cure cancer go through? And the answer is yes.
Spoiler alert.
So you don't have to see it. And then the credits roll.
I guess the only person I didn't introduce, by the way, on this panel is myself. I'm Michael Rand. I'm an associate professor of communication here in the School of Communication at CSU. And I'm also a documentarian as well. So I have a number of students from a writing class of mine that are here today. And I'd like to move the topic along now to the differences between writing scripts for documentary and writing screenplays for narrative films. This is a toss-up. Anybody can take it.
I have no experience in documentaries, although some of the things that I've written, what I will do is I will take a true event. My last film, as Professor Rand mentioned, was called Bighorn, and it's a very strange concept. But what happened was I heard a story. I know this may be off track, but I'm just saying that in advance. I heard a story that was true, which was, I'm from New Hampshire, so I heard the story when the New England Patriots won their first Super Bowl in 2002, that Adam Vinatieri, who was their kicker, who won the game for them, his great-great-grandfather, Felix Vinatieri, was an Italian immigrant who was General Custer's band leader in real life. And they were on their way to the Little Bighorn, and they're at the Powder River, and they kind of went, let's just leave the band back here. We could use the horses. And so they all survived, and then eventually, this bloodline goes on. And I thought how interesting that was, just about how tenuous life is, and everything kind of hangs on a thread. But what I did is, I think that was a really fascinating, true story. But of course, what I did is I took it and I turned it into this weird Twilight Zone episode, essentially, where it's the day after the Super Bowl and it's in Boston and everybody's really depressed because they had a lousy kicker and he misses the field goal and they're all depressed. And then this professor at Harvard talks about, and we sort of researched it so it would sound really good and look really good up on the board about alternative universes and string theory and all that. And then it goes it cuts back and forth between the Bighorn and Boston in 2002. So, my experience is always taking a true fact and then really messing it up, So, my undergrad degree is in history too, so those sort of quirky stories really resonate with me.
I think it's some of it's format and some of it is content. If you look at a screenplay, for those of you who are doing, narrative fiction, it has a very specific kind of format that you're supposed to follow. I think with documentary, it really depends on the documentary, and I'll be curious to see whether the two of you did any scripting with your films, because I think that a historical documentary, for example, where you're going to sort of be building the story from existing archival material, that would be an example of something, or something that's very journalistically based, where it would make sense to script it out. But if you're doing a very kind of cinema verite type film where you're maybe following a character, you know, over years and years and years, you know, you may not need to make a script. You'll still need to organize your footage in some way. But to kind of think about different ways of scripting, and then in terms of formatting, you know, I've seen documentaries that follow the narrative format for scripting. I've seen documentaries that follow sort of the 2-column where you've got, you know, video, audio, and you just kind of, you know, go shot by shot. You know, and then I've seen examples where maybe people put stuff on index cards and kind of organize that way, or do it actually all, you know, on the computer. But I'd be very curious to know how the two of you have handled that.
Well, my background was writing fiction scripts, shorts, and features, and I made the shorts, but the features I'm from Boston, I have no connections, and they were getting read, and it was like, I just couldn't get over the hump to make something. And I remember going to a documentary screening in Boston that a friend had done, and it was a good documentary, but I just sat there burning with jealousy. Like, and that's a petty emotion, and I am guilty. And I was just looking, I'm like, this guy made a movie, and everyone's sitting here watching it, and there was no script, and no actors, and no costumes. Wait a minute, I'm gonna make a documentary. And I'm like, it'll be easy. You know, I'll just show up with a camera. But what I didn't realize, and writing a feature script, I think, for me, is the hardest creative thing I've ever, it's like, it's an impossibility. It is so hard to do it and feel good about it for me. But what I didn't realize is writing the documentary for a film like I made that kind of doesn't have a narrative. Like, I watched God Loves Uganda the other day, and I'm like, amazing film, you know, you're putting your life on the line, but I'm like, at least they had a story to follow. You know, it's like, this bad thing happened, these people did this, here's how it resolved itself, and I had no idea what I had made. I just went out and got all this information, and it took me 2 years to organize it and say, how can I make sense of this for an audience? I just said, well, I want to find out, I just want to meet these people and see if there is a story here. So the writing just happened after the filmmaking, which was really desperate. And I saw Ben's film yesterday, and more than any film I've maybe ever seen, like editorially, like, did you have a plan? His toggles between narrative and the making, figuring out how to make the narrative. And I sent him a note last night going, wow, I've never, like, the structure was so atypical. You know, you've seen survey films and you've seen kind of narrative documentary, and he made something like I had never seen before, and it freaked me out thinking about this topic.
Well, A, thank you so much. And B, I mean, I think most truly satisfying documentaries still have an emotional arc that is similar to what you see in a narrative feature. So, you know, when we were editing our film, you know, we sort of did what you did. We went out and we shot just 40 hours of documentary footage, and then you're left with like, oh, what do I do with all this? And so we sort of did script out what would be the emotional arc that we want the film to have. And then we didn't end up using the words we wrote in that script so much, but we did sort of figure out how to take our documentary footage and use it to craft this arc that we wanted.
It's just kind of a narrated
It's
film.
not narrated, no, it's not, but it's still, you know, you need to have, you know, your climax needs to happen here, or you need to have, you know, different just emotional qualities happening at different times for your audience to feel like they've gone on a journey. And you can do that with documentary footage, and I think if you do that effectively, your audience will feel like they've gone through an experience with you.
I think my experience is probably similar to yours in that it wasn't a traditional narrative. We weren't following one character or, you know, a group of characters throughout the whole film. It was
Like, find out about this thing.
Yeah, find out about this thing when we get there. There was always well, when I first went out and filmed, I didn't have the outline yet because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're gonna get as a documentarian. So I would do exhaustive research on each subject matter, and in my film, it's a lot of scholars, and then it was a lot of exhaustive research on subject matter that I didn't know very much about. Religious studies scholars at Harvard, and then a sociologist here, and a psychologist here, and a grief counselor here, and then a number of pet owners, and just, you know, more conventional subjects where we were having kind of a more conventional dialogue. And so after that, I had the luxury, because of my executive producer, of making transcripts, which I had not had in films before. So if you don't know what that is, they take all of the footage. You have to give them good audio. So some of my interviews, if the audio was bad, I couldn't send it in. And then, of course, it didn't make it into the film, but I would send it to this house, and they would go through and script out your entire, the entire transcript of the interview, including my questions. And I never wanted to be in the film, but it was, of course, very helpful to see my questions again, especially after doing 2 + 3, I mean, now it's been years in making this film. But so then after that, it was kind of an interesting dilemma, because you have so much control over it, and after hearing I was the one constant in every single interview. Even if I ran out of money, I was the one having to do 2 camera setups, and that was, even if I couldn't bring my DP along. So I knew what the narrative would be. I think after having talked to all of my subjects, I knew what the arc should be. I knew but my editor, of course, not having been at all of these, in all of these interview settings, didn't know. And then you do selects, and I don't know if this is common. I don't know if other documentary filmmakers, some that I had talked to, this is very common, but I would do my selects, she would do her selects of the transcripts, our most, our favorite parts of the transcript, and parts that we thought were not overlapping other subjects. Because, a lot of your subjects are saying the exact same thing. And with our film, it was kind of especially odd, because it's these little scenes encapsulated where, I couldn't, with scholars in between. So if I was at Summum in Salt Lake City, Utah, religious organization, I wanted that scene to only be Summum and not have a scholar come in. I wanted the scholar to come in afterwards. So whereas there was this constant. So a scholar who might otherwise be better at a different part of the film, inside, the conference, the funeral conference in Las Vegas, probably would have been better in the part where we're talking about how we anthropomorphize pets, had to be in Vegas because we were in Vegas there. Yeah. And then a lot of the scholars are saying the same thing in a number of places. So anyway, it was a matter of going through, making our selects, figuring that sort of stuff out. And then, of course, it's also just, her stories were not necessarily the stories that I wanted to tell, even in those encapsulated scenes. I don't know if I can maybe give an example later if you want.
So well, I was just going to ask a question, because when you mentioned transcriptionist, my first film, basically, I got a medical transcriptionist to take all of the, yeah. I put it onto audio cassette, and they went with it on that. And I found that really useful in isolating the most important things that people said. So I want to ask those on the panel that have done documentary work, how much of the narrative that you generate, if you do put it in script form, hangs on what you get out of the interviews? Have you seen a tendency to have like one person or two person set the narrative for you in your interviews?
My film was kind of narrative-less. It's very, amorphous. Like a lot of the rules that other films apply, I didn't apply. But what I found was I tried to steer, do leading questions, which you're not supposed to do, but after themes started to develop, I started a lot of questions with, wouldn't you say that, leading the witness, just because I was like, I wanted this thing to work. But I think at the end of the day, that was the hardest part. It's like, these are the truths, and this is the footage, and as much as you try and fight that, the truth of the matter becomes overwhelming. And then it's just how much do you want to cheat that in the edit. Like my film ended up being kind of like a very positive love letter to the people who have the guts to make things and see it through. But I totally had another film that could be like, what a pain in the ass creative people are, and how petty and diseased in the mind they are. And I got that cut too, because it's both. But I had to decide what I wanted to make.
I appreciate Tim's honesty, because not only with regard to that, but also with regard to, like, I'm sitting there full of jealousy, and I so totally get that, but I do. I find that there is always two movies.
Okay, I'm going to throw a question in here that I know some of my students will want to know. Do any of you ever work with a storyboard format to set things up?
Yes. I think just for your own confidence, even if you never use it, showing up with a plan creates, for me, I'm not an established filmmaker. Plus, I come from an advertising background where 30 seconds might have 12 very carefully boarded setups. So for me to make a feature film, even a documentary where I didn't even know the locations I was going to lots of times and had never been there before, I had to board it just so I had a plan in my head to deviate from. Otherwise, you show up, and I think your subject can feel like, this kid doesn't know what he's doing, and he doesn't have a plan. So for your own peace of mind, because there's so many tangents on documentary that you do not experience when you make a fiction film. Making a fiction film is glorious, because you have absolute control. You know where you're shooting. You know what the situation is. You know where to put the dolly tracks. But in documentary, you show up, and you're like, oh, in the photos, I didn't realize this floor is ruined, or there's a highway next door and we can't hear anything. So I say board everything, script everything. Even if you're not sleeping the night before, read the people's bios and do your research just to calm your own jet, so you walk in there with the false air of knowing what you're doing.
But I think it's also important to be open. And I think that's the challenge a lot of times with documentary, because I think I have the exact opposite feeling about fiction films, because I feel like it's this false sense of control that you can almost control everything, but things will go wrong. And then it's very frustrating because you're trying to fix them later. And I think in documentary, you're freed from that a little bit. You still should plan, and you still, should try and, make sure that you're not just going in and sort of just shooting everything willy-nilly. But the story really is going to come together when you're editing. And, and I think you can try and control, you can try and say, well, these are the things I would like these people to say, because it fits into what my vision of the film is. But sometimes they go in a completely different direction. Sometimes the story goes in a completely different direction. And sometimes it's actually a more interesting direction than what you came in thinking it was going to be. So I think it's that balance of trying to plan, but not over control.
I think it's also, my background was not in playwriting, but I used to act a lot and it was more on the improv side, so there was no script, but when there was a script, there were stage directions, and so that's, and I, obviously with screenwriting, that's how it is. And it was really tough for me to transition when I wasn't doing traditional storyboarding where, like images, but I had a board that I had stuff, note cards, just a million note cards of the arc, and then the cascading bits of each narrative, and then going through it. And I found it so difficult doing the paper cut with the transcripts to keep in mind that there's always observational footage that is kind of like stage directions, as they might be in a screenplay. So you know that there's this action happening, but it's not someone saying something, because it's not an interview. It's not in an interview, but it is actually a part of the narrative. So I found that to be kind of always tough to, oh right, there's that action happening, and it doesn't happen when people are speaking, so I never put it in the paper cut like stage directions, like a screenplay. So.
Now I know that Tim, you didn't generate any kind of a script, right? At all, right?
No, I wrote some titles and chapter headings to make sense of it. like I didn't take a writer credit because I felt, compared to the screenwriting I'd done in the past, it felt really minimal, but it was essential to organizing the information.
Okay. I'd like each one of you to tell us your approach to the, well, in your case, the current project you're working on, or the most recent one you've completed, in terms of the writing aspect of it and just how much writing is there. Because oftentimes writing is not writing. So, Alfred, can we start with you?
Because I do, narrative fiction, it's obviously all very much scripted out. We also use storyboards, and we usually have a shot list, and usually the shot list and the storyboards go out the window in the first hour, and nobody even remembers that there was a shot list or a storyboard after that. Most of all me, and so it gets a little crazy. But on the features that I've written, you're a more sophisticated audience with regard to writing probably than a lot of other folks would be. But I presume how the narrative works in a film, which is the screenwriting is typically 3 acts, and it's a 1-2-1 format. Meaning, let's say in a feature script that's 100 pages, it's the first 25, then there's 50, then there's 25, and that's how your arc moves. I try to do that in shorts as well, because I think that one of the great failings of shorts are, and every short filmmaker who has ever talked to me about this, I've told them the same thing. I've said, look, make sure there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Make sure that there's an end, especially an end. Because what ends up happening in short films, and I've made this mistake, so I'm not saying, I'm so great at it. The last ones I've been much better at it, but what happens is they sort of meander off into oblivion at the end, like a Saturday Night Live's, a skit. Like you go, what? The credits roll, and it's like No Country for Old Men, the short version. Like you go, what? Gee, I think the film broke, and you go, oh no, they don't. Film doesn't break anymore, and so that's one of the things for me. So I really try to do that 1-2-1, beginning, middle, end format. Not only in the screenplay, but also I think one of the things that gets lost is it has to be done in the scenes as well. Each scene has to have that same type of format. Now, there's always in narrative fiction that thing about, well, you don't really have to do it that way. There's new ways to tell stories and all that. And sure, Quentin Tarantino does it somewhat differently and all that, but there's almost every script you can break down into that, and it's really important. There's reasons why that format has been around for thousands of years, and that's because generally it works and it's satisfying. But that is, that for me, that's my approach to it. So,
Amy?
Okay, yeah. So, well, I did take a writing credit in mine, but not. I was urged to do so. I didn't want one, even though there's a very tiny narration in it that I did write, but it's maybe a minute long. But I was told to put the writing credit in, and like a number of documentary filmmakers, think it just confuses people watching a documentary to see the writing credit. But it was definitely written. I mean, with a paper cut, there's no question it was. So, and there's so much control in it. I guess an example would be, and I really hope I didn't just flash everyone, sorry. Basic instinct up here.
Basic instinct.
Talking about forever. But anyway, an example would be dog.
Now they're going to be watching.
Come see it. There's
Get
a
that
lot.
waiver
There's
back.
a lot. One of the segments is on cloning. Not to give it away, it comes near the. Well, it's one of the least conventional way to memorialize your pet, because in a way people are cheating death.
Is that happening now?
Yeah, you can clone a dog. So my editor and I just didn't see eye to eye on it. So it was funny to see. So she did a paper cut. I had to go shoot someone, and she was playing around with the footage and had written kind of like a little paper cut to send to me, and I was doing the same thing. And it's so funny how you actually you are writing a scene. Hers was the story of this subject and how hard he worked to get the money to clone his dog. It's $100,000 to clone your dog, which is obviously quite expensive. He worked really, really hard to get the money to do it. To me, that I didn't care at all. Yes, it was neat that he had worked that hard. I didn't mind, though, that it might make him seem like he had money. For me, the interesting part was, does he think we're cheating death? Does he think he's cheating death? Does he think there's soul transfer? Does he think that the old dog is now existing? The old dog's soul is existing in this new dog, the two new dogs. Does he, there were all these other things that I thought, and I wanted to know about the process. And for her, she was like, I don't care about the process. I don't want to hear about the science. So the way that scene would have been written was completely different. And of course, it changed the narrative arc. It would have changed it entirely depending on which way we went with it. We, as the director, we went with my way. Yeah, I mean, the two, we had paper cuts. They were written, both of them, totally different scenes. So.
Erica, your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends on the kind of film, but I would say I tend to take that approach. I don't know how many people, if you're even still teaching people to do paper edits for documentary. I'm still of that era where that just is really helpful, where you actually take the transcripts and log your footage and then essentially, print it out and physically move things around and then try and do it, online and see if it works. And sometimes it works great, and sometimes, you get very stuck on the paper edit has to be this way, and then it just doesn't work once you start putting it, into the editing system. But I just find it's important for me to remove myself from kind of the technology of it and look at the material in a different way. I find if I'm just trying to edit completely in the editing system, I can lose focus very easily. And I would imagine for a lot of films, the typical documentary is probably, I don't know how many hours of footage you all have, but, you're talking probably at least 100 hours in most cases, sometimes 200, 300 hours of footage. So just kind of getting yourself familiar with all that footage can be quite a job. So I find that process is still really important.
Only one guy left.
So the bummer of going last is, and the benefit is that I have very little new to contribute to this conversation. But basically, I'm in agreement with sort of Alfred's model for thinking about it. I watch a movie every day, and it doesn't really matter what it is. It could be National Treasure 2. I think there's still value in just, even bad movies, you learn a lot from them. And for me, approaching documentary from sort of that narrative perspective, I think about it in terms of a 3-act structure still. So my process is I will go through, take my 100 hours of documentary footage and sort it into a bunch of different timelines based on sort of what they're about, either in terms of their emotional value or their specific content value. And I will just sort it that way because God knows you need to sort it somehow because you'll just get overwhelmed, like you said. And then I use that footage to construct scenes that have a specific purpose, the same way you would with a narrative, and achieve the emotional arc that I want to achieve. And in that way, I would consider that writing, even though it's not always literally writing, but that's what you're doing. You're crafting a narrative in the same way.
Those of you who have done documentaries, have you ever generated a script or part of a script in order to raise funds to complete the documentary?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to say something about that because I think there are different aspects of writing for documentary, and since most documentary filmmakers are often trying to raise funds either before they begin production or as they're in the midst of production, you have to have something to show, and sometimes you don't have your video material yet because you're still filming it or haven't started. So you have to show something. So you can't necessarily have a whole screenplay, but you have to have, you know, whether it's a synopsis or a treatment or a proposal or something that kind of tells us, you know, what we're going to see, what the film is about, you know, why you're making it, who it's for, you know, and what you see will be the purpose of the film, you know, especially if you're going after foundation money. You know, because they don't want to just see that you have a nice story. They want to know, how is this film going to make the world a better place and fit with our mission? So in a sense, you will be writing from the very beginning, even if your storyline ends up changing once you start filming.
Also, sometimes to the detriment of the project.
Yeah.
They pigeonhole it. I started on Kickstarter originally to get enough money to then get an executive producer, but still, the amount of people who, and it was never taxidermy anyway, but the amount of people who come up to me and say, oh, your film about taxidermy, or the number of articles that are sent about it, and my film is not about and it's also not as sensational as I think people assume it is. I chose the most provocative subject matter of the whole film because I had a feeling it would get me the funding on Kickstarter, and it did. But now it's not that, so I think it kind of ends up maybe working to your disadvantage at the end, but at least you get funding, so there's that.
Now, I know that you must do something like that to get funding for yours, right? Alfred?
I've made 5 shorts, and the most we've ever spent total is $5,000.
Oh,
so
goodness.
It's kept really, really tight. But that's a little bit deceiving because, you know, I have a lot of friends who are filmmakers, and we help each other out. You know, it's really weird, but I always, every time I do a film, I always remember walking in the house, throwing down my stuff and saying, that's it. Next time, 2 people in a room talking. That's it. And you know, and I never do it. The last time, the one I was talking about that involves Custer, you know, Bighorn, I had to get footage from the NFL. We recreated Custer's last stand on a buffalo farm in Durham, New Hampshire. I had mounted cavalry in costume. It was crazy. You know, it was just crazy. Friends
For $5,000?
Yeah, for $5,000. Let me tell you how we did it though. We're not paying for a camera. We're renting lenses, renting lights. Usually paying a gaffer. Usually everyone else is pitching in. And I always find that sort of magic happens, which is really bad for filmmaking because I spoke to a filmmaking class a couple of weeks ago, and I was just thinking, oh my God, you should never do it this way, never. And for instance, when I was doing Bighorn, we needed a Custer. And you know, so I put it out on newenglandfilm.com, and I'm thinking, you know, I need a Custer. So people are sending in pictures, and they look like me. And I'm going, I need a Custer, not somebody who looks like me. You know, Custer, right? And so this guy in the Midwest calls me, and he said, hey, I heard, you know, you were doing this film, and I'm a Custer reenactor. Can I read the script? I said, sure. So I send it out to him, and then I look him up, and his name is Steve Alexander. He's not a Custer reenactor. He's the Custer reenactor. He's been recognized by the United States Congress as the foremost Custer living historian. He played him on the History Channel, played him on A&E. He plays him every year at the Native American reenactment at the Bighorn, and lives in Custer's old home in Monroe, Michigan. So I talked to him, and I'm like reading about this guy in these books, you know, like, you know, by major writers, and you know, he's obviously a total freak, you know, and so he calls me up and he goes, I love the script, I want to play Custer. And I go, listen, Steve, you know, we'd love to have you, but we got no money, you know. I mean, you know, he goes, I love the script so much, I'll drive out to New Hampshire and play him for free. And I go, well, you're right, that's perfect, you know. So, so I'm having these conversations with him, and they go something like this. Hey, Steve, I've got 2 Colt 45s, you know, for you to be firing at the end, you know. And he goes, Freddie, I've got that's what I go by, and he goes, I've got Custer's original British Bulldog Whipley pistols. And I go, okay, you can use those. And then we get the governor's horse guards who all have period uniforms. And they're all these guys are so into it. You know, they're all ex-veterans, and if you don't have the right guide on or the right uniform, they really look down on you. They'll let you do fiction, but you know, man, you better have the, you know, Springfield rifle or something, you know. So we get out there and we're shooting Custer's Last Stand with a herd of buffalo who are really ornery behind a 50,000-volt electric fence. I got mounted cavalry, all filled, you know, everybody's got guns, antiques filled with gunpowder, running all over the field. We got Indians, we got arrows, we got smoke. And I'm thinking to myself, because I do personal injury law, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be really hard to explain if something goes wrong. And you know, it was complete chaos, absolutely. And still, we came in under $5,000. By the way, just as an aside, we premiered the film in Monroe, Michigan at Custer Week. And the place is filled with like half the people in the theater. Same theater that They Died with Their Boots On was premiered in 1941. And we had some of Custer's relatives there, and half the people were in uniform. And then they showed it at the Bighorn, at the symposium. I had never been there before, you know, and it was, and you know, one of the nice things about making any type of film is you have these amazing experiences. You know, last night I went to good old Frida, and I met Frida Kelly, who was the Beatles' secretary, and that was a great thrill and a really interesting thing. And by doing Bighorn, now I'm out at the Bighorn. I'm on Last Stand Hill as the sun goes down by myself, and the next day, Steve Alexander, he's playing Custer at the you know, the reenactment, and 70 people in the reenactment. It's on protected Indian land. We're over there, and he says to me, "Freddie, you gotta be in the reenactment." I go, no, I don't need to be in the reenactment. I see those signs out there. They say, "Stay on the trail. This is rattlesnake country." And so he talks me into it, right? So I died next to the Little Bighorn River, next to Custer, and I never would have had that experience. So that's how we keep them down. Can I tell you one other story about keeping costs down?
You're a storyteller. Okay. It's obvious.
So I did this film a few years ago called The Stag Hunt, and I decided, again, we have no money, right? And I wanted, and by the way, in New Hampshire, it's getting a little bit different, but we shoot in New Hampshire. So, you know, people aren't really cynical. I lived in LA for a while, and you know, they'll start up their lawnmowers, so you have to go pay them off, that kind of thing. But in New Hampshire, they'll still help you out for the most part. It's getting a little bit different now because everybody's shooting films. So we're doing the Stag Hunt, and I decided that I wanted to have do a shootout with a moving Learjet on the tarmac at the Pease Trade Port in Newington, New Hampshire. So the first thing I got to do is find a Learjet, right? So I found this guy who was a big fan of the Norman Rockwell Code that I had done earlier, and he goes, "Oh man, yeah, I love the film." I go, "Listen, I'd love to have, you know, I really want to have a moving Learjet, and you know, we're gonna have the shootout and all this." And I go, and I got no insurance, and by the way, I don't have any money for fuel. And he goes, "Oh man," you know, he goes, "Well, listen, can I get shot too?" And I go, "Yeah, absolutely," you know. And so the next thing you know, we're shooting this like massive scene with a moving Learjet. I'm screaming into the engines, you know. This thing's moving, everybody's shooting guns. Honest to God, it was the same day that Bill Clinton and the older George Bush were speaking at the University of New Hampshire graduation. We're out there shooting. It's a Saturday morning. We got guns. We got an arsenal. We got I get a call from the Secret Service, right? And they go, "Hey, the ex-presidents are taking off on the runway 500 feet in front of you. How about you guys put your guns down so we don't shoot you by accident?" So I go, "Oh my God!" And I go running out there and "Put your guns," you know. And, you know. So we always kind of have an adventure, but for some reason we've been able to talk people into doing things they don't really want to do for no money. So we've been kind of lucky. Because, you know, people usually look at one of my short films and go, like, what 50, 75 grand? I'm thinking, oh God, I wish. You know, I could I feel like sometimes like I could shoot Apocalypse Now for 75 grand, you know, probably be over Great Bay in New Hampshire, and the helicopters wouldn't look probably that good, but we could do it, you know, so.
I have one more question I want to get out, and then I'd like to open it up so that people in the audience can ask some questions as well. I have a friend who's a writer who started off as a creative director at an ad agency, and he's written a number of videos and screenplays and things like that. And he sees himself as primarily a writer, but he became his own producer and sometimes director, and his comment was, I want to make sure that my film scripts are executed and not executed. Do any of you hold a similar view?
I mean, I 100% feel that way, in that my film, I didn't do any Kickstarter because I didn't want to be beholden to anybody in this little part of my life. And I'm also a songwriter. It's like I can make this thing that isn't compromised, and if it stinks, it's because I wasn't good enough, not because somebody told me to change it or felt differently. So that, for me, filmmaking is that, and just trying to shape something the absolute best I can, where in advertising, the client has final say, and lots of times you can get them to a good place, but you go, you know, a 30-second ad, I've spent 1.2 million on a 30-second ad, and I've, you know, made my feature for about 50,000 bucks.
Yeah.
But that I think is the thing for me, you know, because I don't think anybody up here is really doing it for money at this point. You know, certainly, you know, I've been on panels for short films, and they're like, why'd you do this? How are you going to make your money back? And you go, no, that's not what we're doing. You just do it to say, hey, can I put something good into the world and make my little dent for good?
Anybody else? Erica?
I mean, I just think, you know, I agree with you. I really think that, you know, and it's not that you can't make a living doing this. I don't want us to be super discouraging. But, you know, a lot of times people will do things on their own, you know, that are kind of what pays the bills, and then they'll do their project that's their labor of love. And, you know, and it's not easy. And I would just say with documentary especially, it's a long process. You know, you have to be willing to love this topic so much that you would be happy to live with it for 2, 3, sometimes 5 or more years, from start to finish, and then getting it out there. So I think that's, you know, you have to love the topic, or it's not going to work.
And you do see doc directors like Chris Smith and Errol and Doug Prey and a lot of the guys, they shoot ads.
Yeah.
You know, they can get 20,000 bucks a day and shoot a campaign of 3 spots. And like, I always feel like if I can hire one of those guys, I do, because it's, you know, some of that could end up in their next movie that I'll be a fan of.
Anybody else choose to comment on that, or should we throw it open?
Back to your initial question, I don't think I'm a great director. I don't like actors, and I'm not great at talking to them. But if I have to direct something, no, it's true. Don't get me started. I don't even want to talk about it. But if I have to direct something in order for it to, you know, become a reality, I'll do it.
Okay. Fair.
I would agree.
Okay.
With both, everything that they've said. You have to be super passionate. You know it's going to be I think now it's kind of veered off from what, I'm not sure what, I can't remember.
The original thing was the notion of writing and then protecting it by being the producer-director. Yeah.
Well, I will speak to what Tim said about, I mean, I'm beholden to everyone now. So.
And that's what writing the check the day we all went to LA, like, broke my soul in half. But now I feel like, oh, if I don't have to sell it. You know, like if it doesn't end up on HBO, people won't go, hey, you said.
And I feel I'm kind of in the opposite situation where not only do I have my Kickstarters, which there were thankfully many, then I have the executive producer who, luckily it's getting into some great festivals, so there's a huge sigh of relief after that. But yeah, no, I mean, there are these hurdles, and it's constantly, there's a lot of pressure of, you know, when you're doing this stuff, because you are, you know, I do have to, unfortunately, sorry.
And with documentary, you're also beholden to the people you're documenting, you know, and it's not that you have to necessarily, you know, have them see the film and have them approve of everything. I don't think you want to get yourself in that situation. But, you know, they're trusting sort of their representation to you as a filmmaker. And I think that's actually in many ways, I think, more important than, you know, the idea of being beholden as a director or a writer, is because they're essentially writing the content for you.
And they often have their own agendas.
Yeah.
So, you know,
That's
number of
something,
examples in that. Yeah.
that's something I hadn't even considered, never having made a documentary before. We had our premiere in our hometown, and 3 of the people in the documentary were there and had never seen it. And walking, I'm like, they're gonna come, this is gonna be great. And my film's pretty flattering, like pretty positive. But I completely had not even remotely thought about that. And then they show up and we're doing like photographs and stuff. I'm like, oh my God. What if they feel that I'd taken their personal stories and edited them in a way to have like gotcha moments? Like you do cuts to make things entertaining or impactful, and you manipulate the truth of it. And that was crushing. Like one guy talks about the death of his wife in the film, and I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna see that. We had like 800 people there. And he came up in tears with his daughter and thanked me at the end. But that is a massive responsibility. And you know, we've all watched entertaining documentaries where the filmmaker just does what he wants to like be ruthless and make an entertaining product. And I would not have the guts to do that.
And you also have reality TV. I don't know, sometimes if it is a provocative subject, I've had 1 million reality TV companies contact me. And my film, in spite of a lot of the things I've been talking about, is not sensational. It's very sensitive to the subjects. It was never meant to be that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's speaking
but to
that
you,
point.
but it's different for a person who's not in film, seeing themselves 40 feet high.
Absolutely.
And I had not considered that.
Yeah.
Well, are we ready? You got questions?
It was kind of a synthesis of what the last couple of things that you mentioned. You said something about the producers writing the check and influencing the work, and so you have to plan it out and write it kind of. And then Ms. Finkel, you mentioned like the current thing of reality TV. And I was wondering, do sometimes the producers try to impinge your integrity and get you to change the story to reflect something that really isn't true, even though it's documentary style, people don't perceive it as being true, but you can always cut and slant, edit things, and they say, no, this is not on my agenda, I want you to change it like this, and it really causes an ethical issue.
I'm pretty hardcore and about saying no, so she was, there was a lot in the contract about creative control, so I didn't have to worry about that. The trailer does make my film look more sensational than it is, and that is because she wanted it to, yeah, there were definitely some arguments there, and you know, there are certain battles you want to, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure she'll watch this. And she would smile, she would laugh about it, but yeah, definitely. There are many, she told me the other day that she wanted it to be far more sensational. She wanted it to be more reality TV. So, but then now that it's getting into festivals that would never take a film that was reality TV, she's quite pleased. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Just curious, all you guys, when you first started your, creative processes and everything that you've made, how did you go about getting your work out there? Just some of the process behind that.
The one thing I would say, if there's some students in the room, the day before I went into production, and the day after I went into production, absolutely nothing had changed in my circumstances other than the fact that I said I'm now in production. And it's just, we're going. And you gotta get people who are as crazy as you. And I had a long talk with Nina the other night of like, no one's gonna care about your shit as much as you care, but find the people who are as close to crazy and keep it small. Keep it, because if one person flakes out on you, you're done.
Yeah.
It's so hard to keep momentum. So that's what I would say. Get a small group and say, we're going. And a little plan and a ton of momentum is enough to get it going.
That's really true. I really, there have been times where we don't have the money, or we don't have something, we don't, not all the elements are in place. Of course, it's a short. If you were doing a feature, you'd be in probably deep trouble. But there's a great magic to saying, we're going. This is the day we're starting. This is what we're doing.
And believing it.
And believing it. Yeah. And it's also true that the chemistry, it's sort of like putting a band together in a way. The chemistry on your crew is truly, if you get one person even who's really gone off the deep end, it will affect everything, particularly when that person is the cinematographer, and it always is.
People want to work on creative projects, so I think if you set up the circumstances where it's going to happen and you make that known, people will want to be a part of it. I mean, I think the trick is just to be a leader. The trick is just to get the ball moving and make sure things are happening at certain times. People will want to work on it. And the other thing I would say, this is tangentially related, if you do a film, start your Facebook page like the second you start pre-production, and start a mailing list. These are things I did like once we were doing post. I wish we'd been started months earlier, years earlier, because that, a mailing list is like antique as that sounds, is a hugely valuable thing. Just ask people for their email address and where they live. And like I have a screening in Boston in a couple weeks, I can email everyone from Boston and have them show up. And that's hugely valuable.
And also gratitude, by the way. Just there's so many people that it takes to make something, and so many are volunteering their time. It's just, there's no way for it not to, maybe there is, maybe people pay for everything, but I could never have done this without hundreds and hundreds of people who at some point, whether it was a conversation and some advice here, or,
Yeah, and I think it's really important, building on that, to kind of build a community. I mean, when you're in school, it's very easy because you sort of have a ready-made, group of people you're working with and, are getting feedback from. But then when you graduate, you kind of sometimes have to build that community yourself. Or if there's a film organization or the festival, that can kind of provide some of that. But even if that doesn't exist, definitely stay in touch with all the people, you're in touch with now, and build that circle out, because that's really important, not just for potentially collaborating on projects, but also getting feedback from people at different stages of the process of making the film, getting it out there, helping to build an audience, all your friends have friends who might be interested in the topic. So that sounds really obvious, but I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in a very small circle of what we're doing that we don't think about how important kind of creating those bigger circles are.
And help other people with their projects and contribute $50 to their Kickstarter, because you're going to need all that later. Yeah. You'll get that money back.
And I realize that you are beholden to your Kickstarters, but Kickstarter is, you have a built-in audience who are then going to, and they care enough about your project to then tell a million other people about it. Yeah. Mine, I got more press from Kickstarter. I'm so grateful to Kickstarter because they liked it and promoted it like crazy, and that got a bunch of press. But I would never have been able to make the film without them. There was an article that made me sound a little nutty, but in a very public source, in the New York Times, and any subject I sent that article to, they signed on, because they knew I wasn't going to make fun of them. They knew I would, but it would never have happened. I would never have gotten that were it not for Kickstarter.
I saw a hand up at the back by the door. You still have a question?
Yeah, it was for Amy. You said that your writing or your directing or producing style was to keep it as original as possible, and you were getting into the what would you do if your film went mainstream, and would you re-edit it, make it more?
I think it's hard when you just hear kind of little tidbits about the film. It's not mainstream. I don't think it could be it would never be real. I would never do a reality show. I was pitched and by a couple of companies. I mean, I just wouldn't do it. It wasn't. It's not the nature of the film, and it's also, I think, probably less. You know, it is more about the sociology and more about human nature. I always wanted it to be more about us than about pets, and more about, you know. So it's not. I don't think it could be. It could be, yes. The freeze drying thing could be, you know. And a lot of the subjects have been poached by reality companies, and I'm always supportive of them to go do whatever makes them happy. And if they want to do a reality show, one of my subjects was just on that show, Immortalized, and had, you know, an okay experience. But yeah, no, I don't think it would ever be mainstream.
Go ahead.
When Ben was talking earlier, I noticed that he said, we thought about this, we thought about that. Also, Amy being grateful. I'm looking at a stage filled with artists who seem to have healthy egos. Okay? And when it was suggested to help each other, that's fantastic. Because this isn't about fame, it isn't about money, it's about creating something that's good.
If I had fame or money, I could do it without we. But the reality is, you know, when you're making features at the sort of cost level that we're talking about, it's a team effort, and you just need each other's help. I don't know if I could make another feature for the same cost as the current one. I probably couldn't, just because I made this movie with about 800 favors that I probably can't ask again. But it's a team effort.
Go ahead.
Put to this as two questions. I was impressed at kind of the breadth of your other work and having time to do this. I also heard you say you lived with it for years, and I think that was a financial matter. So if you got $50,000 to $100,000 to do the documentary, what do you think would have been a reasonable amount of time for you to do it? And then secondly, when and how do you know that it is finished, complete, ready?
Well, I mean, that in my film about the creative process, that's answered explicitly by the creature designer who did Avatar, and he says, you're done when the deadline says you're done. But the thing was, like, I wasn't being beholden to anybody, so I was done when my patience with myself ran out. I remember, and this is, do not do this, but like, I was watching the cut instead of sleeping. I cut till about midnight, and I made the editor stay and download a QuickTime, went home, watched it. At like 3 in the morning, I'm like, wait a minute, it's a movie. And this was after 3 years. You know, I'm like, it's a movie. Like, I would watch this. This looks like things that come out of my television set. And I emailed the head programmer of IFF Boston, which is like our big film festival. And I said, I think I just made a movie. Is your program locked yet? And he's like, I'm leaving for South by Southwest in the morning. I'm going to lock it when I'm there. He goes, can you get me a DVD before I get on the plane? And the editor met him at his apartment before he went to the airport. And like 4 days later, we were like in competition.
Awesome.
But don't do that, because that's, but that was like, after so long, I was so excited I couldn't take it anymore. The sadness and panic of not knowing if I had lied to everybody that we were making a movie. And I was so excited that it seemed that we had. So when I say to people, we were still shooting at that point. And I say to people, oh, my first 4 festivals were all rough cuts. They're like, what kind of marketing plan is that? I'm like, that's the enthusiasm marketing plan.
And if I could just jump in for a second, I actually have a screening and have to leave. And I just want to thank you very much, everybody on the panel, and Professor Rand, and thank you. We only have one screening, so we're in the family film block at 2:40, and I'm supposed to be there before it starts. So thank you again. I really
Thank you.
I want to add something to that, because I think the question is, you know, how do you know you're done? And I think with films, there's when you're done with editing, you know, or when you're done and you've sent it to the film festival or something, but you're not really done, because there's another part we haven't really talked about, which is you, the audience. And audiences, you know, just getting your film out there and seeing how audiences respond, how they react. In some cases, you know, does the film give them some call to action to do something, which not every film has to do, and I actually think there's too many documentaries that do that. But, you know, I think that's still a process of making the film, in a sense, because the audience is a part of that process. I don't see it that it's sort of the filmmakers who are like, I'm done, now it's all up to you, I'm done. There's this whole other, you know, life that the film has, which can be a very long time also, of just getting it out to audiences, whether it's through festivals or, you know, DVD or special screenings or theatrical or whatever. You know, so I think it is a long process.
And if you want to really feel comfortable with your edit, watch it with a room of like 200 or 300 strangers.
Yep.
And all those like artsy dolly shots that you loved sitting with your editor who's your best friend, you're like, what? You know, you squirm every second that is like boring or indulgent. And I totally recut after the IFF Boston thing. I'm like, oh my God, this cannot be in this film. Everyone's bored. No one laughed. And that really helps. Because your friends will just say nice things to you, but like a room full of strangers is terrifying. After this, I only want to make Will Ferrell comedy, so everybody's laughing the whole time, so I'm not panicking.
Even the cut of the movie that I have playing at the festival now, I have since changed. After every single festival, I sit there watching it, and I make notes on my phone, and I say, no, no, no. So the cut that is playing today and tomorrow, I've already made changes to, and when I watch it now, I'm like, no, no, no. But with comedy, you have the benefit of being able to hear when it works and really hear when it doesn't work, because it'll just be quiet. So yeah, it is done when you have to ship it in. We're distributing in a couple weeks. I need to send in the final cut on Tuesday, and so like I will be making changes at 3 in the morning on Monday night.
It's also sometimes it's not done even when you think it's when you send it. We were just talking just before coming here, or yesterday when I saw it on the HD cam version, which I can't run an HD cam at home, which is a type of tape that they play at festivals. But the soundtrack, the music, if you see my phone today, the music is off by a second and 4 frames in 4 places, and I was devastated, of course.
But who's counting?
And the filmmaker is. The filmmaker is, but it's also we're playing Hot Docs next, and they ask for a DCP, which is, these are things that you don't anticipate beforehand that are crazy expensive. It's like $1,000 plus getting drives is it's like insane. So, but yeah, and he, the poor sound editor this morning, I'm so sorry. I screwed up. Like, the accidents happen, mistakes are made, so I did think it was done until about an hour ago, but in fact, yeah. Still going. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we have time maybe to take one more question, and then I'd like to, if our panelists are willing, is give people a chance to kind of come up here and mingle a little bit.
We have a laugh track.
It's working.
You've been waiting a while, haven't you? Yeah. No?
I'll go.
Okay.
All right. Like post Blair Witch, that kind of changed the whole documentary thing. Like, what's like the next trend that you like foresee coming up?
Well, I don't think Blair Witch is a documentary, but I think, I don't know if it's a trend. I think what we're seeing a lot more now is a lot more focus on interactive documentaries, so things that are not necessarily something you would look at in having a beginning, middle, and end necessarily, but something that you would interact with online, on your phone, you know, you would actually interact with, and that it's not that it would influence what happens, but it might be tied into some other, you know, you're interested in this topic, then do this and you can donate here, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think we're seeing a lot more focus on that, particularly from the funding community, which I think does in some ways kind of help direct what happens with documentaries.
You see it at film festivals. A lot of them are starting to do these big interactive
hackathons
things. Yeah. So maybe it'll be an Exquisite Corpse documentary style. That's pretty.
That would be really.
They write their own the subjects.
That's a smart answer. I mean.
I think there's also a thing of like glorious trendlessness in that any of us could, you know, money aside, if you could put your film on the internet and anybody could go watch it. You don't need, it doesn't need to fit to be released. So you can make a weird, amorphous, atypical thing and you don't need anybody's permission anymore. You know, unless you're making Batman or Spider-Man, your film can be released on any number of digital platforms without anybody's approval or head nod. And everyone will hate it, but there'll be 1,000 people who think you're a genius and totally get the weirdness of you. And I like that. Though it's hard for the water cooler kind of thing. Like, I like bands that no one's ever heard of. You know, like, hey, what's that you're listening to? Nothing you've ever heard of and we can't discuss it, move along. And I think films are getting like that in a cool way, except the social parts break down, except on Facebook, you know.
Well, I want to thank Tim and Erica and Amy and Ben, and I got them all right? Okay. Yeah. For being our panelists today. And after we give them a nice round of applause, I want to invite the audience to come down here if there's anyone who wants to ask an additional question or two. We'll stay around for a few minutes, okay? Thank you all very, very much.